The columns at the base of Devil's Tower don't look like rock. That's the first thing. You approach from the highway in northeastern Wyoming, the tower rising above the plains in a way that makes you slow down before you mean to. And what strikes you before the height does, before the sheer vertical drama of it, is the texture at its base. Broken hexagonal columns, each one 5 to 7 feet across, stacked and scattered below the main shaft like something was interrupted here, like something came down. The official explanation is columnar basalt, igneous intrusion, volcanic cooling, molten rock forced upward through the Earth's crust, cooling slowly, contracting in a mathematically predictable pattern, cracking into hexagonal columns the way mud cracks in summer heat, only at a vastly larger scale. It's a clean explanation. I taught in geology courses for 150 years. There's no official controversy in it, but here is something the tour guides don't say. When you take a cross-section of petrified wood that has been mineralized over millions of years, its organic material replaced molecule by molecule with silicon dioxide, and place it under a microscope, the cellular pattern you see is hexagonal. The same geometry, the same ratio of cell wall to interior space, the same mathematical regularity that cooling igneous rock produces is also the structural architecture of biological cellular tissue, preserved in stone. The pattern is not merely similar. At their respective scales, it is the same pattern. Put those two images side by side, and then ask the question, not hysterically, not as fantasy, but as a serious structural inquiry. What if the official story about what Devil's Tower is has been organized around what it cannot be allowed to be? No answer yet. The question is the engine. The story we've inherited is coherent and internally stable. The Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. Ancient ecosystems rose and fell, were buried and compressed over geological time into the coal and fossil record we now extract and study. The landscape was shaped by tectonics, erosion, ice, and volcanism. The largest documented trees are the coastal redwoods and giant sequoias of California, roughly 380 feet at maximum recorded height, roughly 3,000 years at the outer limit of confirmed age. That is the ceiling. The flat-top landforms of the American West, the mesas, the buttes, are the result of differential erosion. Harder cap rock resists weathering while softer stone beneath erodes away, leaving those distinctive flat tops and sudden vertical drops. Clean, settled, case closed. What these explanations share beyond their individual credibility is a common function. Each one isolates, each addresses its formation as a local phenomenon governed by local conditions. No single explanation is asked to account for the global pattern. Now look at a map of the world. Flat-topped formations, mesas, buttes, Inselbergs, Tepui, tabletop mountains appear on every continent. In the Sahara, in the Venezuelan rainforest, across southern Africa, across western Australia, across the Siberian plateau. Different rock types, different climates, different geological ages officially assigned to each one. Because each local explanation holds on its own terms, the global pattern is never asked to explain itself. The global pattern is this: identical shape across 6 continents, in formations assigned to different geological periods, all producing the same wide flat top, the same sudden vertical drop, the same scattered debris field at the base. What single process produces that shape at that scale across the entire surface of the planet? And here is the chemical detail that doesn't go away. The dominant mineral in sandstone, the cap rock most commonly cited in mesa formation, is silicon dioxide. Silica, the same compound, is the dominant mineral in petrified wood. Not a similar compound, the same one. That is a structural rhyme between geology and biology, and it will keep appearing. Here is where the record breaks first. Prototaxites. When an organism documented in the fossil record of the Silurian and Devonian periods, approximately 420 million years ago. It produced upright cylindrical structures reaching heights of up to 26 feet, with internal tissue that paleontologists argued about for over a century. Initially described as a tree, then reclassified as a seaweed, then a lichen. The current official classification is a fungus. The debate ran in peer-reviewed literature through at least 2007, when a team led by C. Kevin Boyce at the University of Chicago applied carbon isotope analysis to multiple specimens and concluded the isotopic signature was inconsistent with photosynthetic activity. Francis Huber of the Smithsonian Institution had argued for decades that the tissue architecture was more consistent with a liverwort than fungal structures. Others proposed the isotopic signature could reflect a mixed metabolic strategy. These readings remain in the published record. They have not been formally closed. What matters is not which classification will eventually prevail. What matters is why this organism was contested for over 100 years. A 26-foot photosynthesizing land organism demands a scale of productivity that forces a recalculation of the entire Devonian ecosystem. A fungus of that size creates no such demand. It does not generate oxygen at scale. It does not imply a canopy. The classification as a fungus is, structurally speaking, the more contained outcome. That may be coincidence. What changes the weight of it is the Carboniferous period. From 359 to 299 million years ago, the atmosphere of this planet contained approximately 35% oxygen, compared to today's 21%. This is not contested. It has been derived through multiple independent methods, including carbon isotope measurements and the analysis of ancient wildfire regimes. The scientific community uses this data primarily to explain Carboniferous insect gigantism. Dragonflies with wingspans exceeding 2 feet, millipedes nearly 8 feet long. Higher atmospheric oxygen allows arthropod respiratory systems to sustain greater body mass, but the logic runs in both directions. 35% atmospheric oxygen is not a starting condition. It is a result. It is the product of photosynthesis operating at a scale with no modern equivalent. The giant insects are the symptom. What produced the atmosphere they breathed was the cause, and the cause was plant life operating at a magnitude the current record simply cannot account for. Now the coal question arrives, and it doesn't resolve quietly. Carboniferous coal seams underlie every industrialized nation. Pennsylvania, Wales, the Ruhr Valley, the Donbas Basin, Siberia. Their combined volume, measured in cubic miles across every continent, represents the compressed biological remains of Carboniferous land vegetation, not oceanic organisms, land plants. The biomass required to produce those seam densities implies surface coverage that forests of 300-foot trees at any reasonable density cannot generate. The numbers are individually published and verified, placed in their respective disciplines, but almost never placed next to each other in the same paper, because the conversation they produce is not one the current framework is structured to host. This is not a conspiracy. It is a structural incompatibility between two sets of accepted data sitting in adjacent disciplines, almost never asked to face each other at the same time. Petrified wood is well understood. Organic material is buried. Groundwater supersaturated with silica permeates the cellular structure, and over millions of years the organic molecules are replaced one by one with silicon dioxide. What remains is stone that preserves the exact cellular architecture of the original tissue. Petrification is not destruction. It is translation. The largest petrified specimens are not horizontal logs. They are vertical columns, embedded in cliff faces, rising from canyon floors, standing in desert formations. The silicified columns in formations of Algeria and Chad stand upright, preserving over 20 feet of their original vertical dimension. What they once extended into is no longer there. The hoodoos of Bryce Canyon in southern Utah rise in vertical columns, some reaching 200 feet, chemically silica dominant. Their columnar regularity is attributed to frost wedging acting on jointed rock. But the joint pattern, the structural reason the rock fractures into columns rather than random fragments, is described in the geological literature as a pre-existing feature of the stone. What produced that structural organization inside the original sediment is, in the literature, incompletely understood. The vertical pillars of Namibia's Fish River Canyon, the standing formations of the Bungle Bungles in Western Australia, and the stone columns of the Mongolian steppe, each has a local explanation. Each holds internally, none is asked to account for the others. The pattern taken together points at something the individual explanations are not structured to surface, that what we read as geology may, at an earlier stage, have been organized, structured, vertical, biological. This is the point where the story stops being about rock formations. The geological column, the framework that assigns ages to strata and organizes the timeline of Earth's biological history, was not discovered. It was constructed. James Hutton formalized uniformitarianism in 1788, establishing that geological processes have always operated at roughly the rate observable today. This replaced catastrophism, the prior model, which held that Earth's history had been periodically interrupted by violent, large-scale events that rendered the present record radically incomplete. Charles Lyell extended Hutton's framework through Principles of Geology, published between 1830 and 1833. Darwin read those volumes on the Beagle. The framework became the interpretive foundation of all subsequent geology and paleontology. The choice was not made on purely empirical grounds. Uniformitarianism produced a stable, legible, governable Earth, one whose resources could be predicted and mapped, whose history could be read in consistent layers like a well-maintained ledger. Catastrophism implied a world that had been violently, incomprehensibly different, a world in which the current record might be a small, distorted fragment of something far larger. The framework that prevailed was the framework that was institutionally useful. What Hutton and Lyell built was not merely a scientific model, it was a cognitive architecture, a set of categories that determined which questions could be formed. In that architecture, a silicified vertical column is a geological formation. A globally distributed pattern of identical shapes is a set of unrelated local phenomena. The question of biological origin for landscape scale features is not wrong. It is simply unaskable. Return to Devil's Tower, 867 feet from base to summit. If it is a stump, the geometry demands a tree measured not in hundreds of feet, but in miles. The root system would have extended across hundreds of square miles. The canopy would have been visible at the curvature of the horizon. A biological structure so far beyond anything in the official record that the ceiling, 300 feet, 3,000 years, doesn't merely fail to explain it. It fails to point in the right direction. The question is not whether organisms of that scale once existed. The question is what happened to all of them, and what it means that the framework we use to study ancient life was built, in the precise decades of Western industrial expansion, to produce a record in which they could not appear, and more specifically, who decided we would stop asking. The Industrial Revolution is taught as a beginning. Humans discovered the power of steam, of coal, of mechanized labor, and the modern world was born. That is the official version. Progress moving forward, pulling civilization behind it. What that version does not ask is what coal actually is, not where it came from in the simple sense, but what it represents about the world that preceded ours. Coal is not a mineral. Coal is biology. Compressed, carbonized, pressure-transformed biological material. Organisms that photosynthesized and grew and died and became, over geological time, combustible stone. Every coal seam is a former living system. Every ton extracted from beneath Pennsylvania or Wales was once a surface organism absorbing sunlight and fixing carbon. The Industrial Revolution was not the beginning of something. It was the consumption of something that had already ended. The civilizations built on coal were not creating from raw materials. They were salvaging from ruins. That reframing asks a different question. Not, how did we build this, but what did we burn? Now step back to the 19th century. Not to the coalfields, to the forests. Between 1850 and 1920, the old-growth forests of North America were logged on a scale with no precedent in recorded history. The Great Lakes, states first, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, then the Pacific Northwest, then the Appalachians. What the logging companies left behind was a landscape of stumps, and the stumps are the record. The photographs survive in the archives of the Library of Congress and state historical societies. Men standing atop stumps with room to spare. Work crews of 8 or 10 gathered on a single cut surface. Stumps 12, 15, 20 feet in diameter. The photographs were meant to advertise the scale of the resource. What they preserved was evidence the official biological record cannot comfortably explain. A tree with a 20-foot base diameter takes a minimum of 2,000 to 3,000 years to reach that girth at current growth rate models. That calculation is internally consistent, but it depends on the assumption that the trees in those photographs were growing from the beginning, that there was no prior stump beneath them, no root system already established. Here is the complication. Trees regenerate from stumps. Cut an oak to its base, and the root system, which has stored decades of carbon and mineral nutrition, produces new growth within a season. The new growth is not starting from scratch. It is drawing on infrastructure that already exists. Second growth forests in the logged out regions of Michigan and Oregon regrew visibly faster than virgin forests of regions never previously cut. The industry documented this because it affected harvest planning. The foresters noticed it without fully asking what it implied. What it implies, if the trees the 19th century loggers photographed were not first growth organisms, but regenerations from a prior root infrastructure, third or fourth or 15th generation growth from stumps of something vastly older and larger, then those 20-foot diameter trees represent not the original scale of life in those landscapes, but a diminished echo of it. The stump beneath the stump, the root beneath the root. The surveys were already underway. In 1867, the United States government launched 4 simultaneous geological surveys of the American West. The Hayden Survey, the King Survey, the Wheeler Survey, the Powell Survey, federally funded, militarily supported, institutionally authoritative, tasked with producing the first systematic official description of the Western landscape and its fitness for development. The surveys ran through the 1870s and produced the maps and geological interpretations that became the permanent official record. The timing is not incidental. The transcontinental railroad was completed in 1869. Mining was industrializing across Nevada, Colorado, and Montana. Timber extraction was moving west. The land needed to be described officially before it could be transferred, sold, drilled, and logged at scale. Description preceded extraction, and the description was performed by institutions that needed the land to be geology, ancient, neutral, pre-human, belonging to no one. What the surveys did not record is equally instructive. The indigenous nations of the American West had occupied that landscape for thousands of years. They had oral traditions and place name systems encoding relationships with the landscape at a depth no federal surveyor spending 2 seasons in the field could replicate. The Lakota described the Black Hills as a living entity. The Diné described the mesa country of the Colorado Plateau in terms implying a prior state, something that had changed, something the current landforms were the remnant of. The Pemen people of Venezuela, living beneath the Tepui of the Orinoco Basin, did not describe those Table Mountains as geological formations. They described them as the homes of ancient beings that predated the present world. These traditions were not recorded as relevant data. They were categorized as mythology, material for the Bureau of Ethnology, not the geological reports. The surveys produced science. The indigenous accounts produced anthropology. The separation was not accidental, it was methodological. The method protected the outcome. The Smithsonian Institution was founded in 1846. The same decade American industrial logging began its acceleration. The same decade the geological surveys were being planned. It became the institutional repository for the material record of the American continent. The bones, the biological specimens, the geological samples unearthed by mining and railway construction across the most physically disturbed period in the continent's recorded history. Its role was standardization, organizing the raw material reality of an industrializing continent into the official narrative of what that continent had been. Standardization during a period of maximum physical disturbance is not neutral curation. It is active selection. What gets labelled, dated and stored defines what the record will later support. What gets discarded or misclassified defines what the record will later be unable to see. Now widen the frame to its full extent. The Tepuy of Venezuela, Roraima, Autana, Ollantaytambo, rise vertically from the Amazon basin floor to flat summits up to 9,000 feet above sea level. Officially classified as Precambrian sandstone plateaus formed approximately 1.7 billion years ago, chemically silica dominant. Their vertical walls show none of the gradual erosional shaping characteristic of most canyon systems. They drop, almost plumb. The Deccan Traps of Western India are classified as flood basalt produced approximately 66 million years ago. The columnar structure is pronounced. The distribution of formations across the subcontinent does not align cleanly with the proposed volcanic source points, an anomaly noted in the literature and explained by secondary factors that themselves require assumptions. The bungles of Western Australia rise in beehive-shaped towers banded in orange and black, officially described as Devonian Age conglomerate shaped by 350 million years of erosion. The banding, regular, concentric, or repeating at consistent intervals, mirrors the growth ring pattern visible in cross-sections of silicified biological material. Not approximately, precisely. Map the global distribution of formations with the flat top profile, the silica dominant chemistry, the vertical drop perimeter, and the debris field at the base. They cluster in the latitudinal bands between 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south, the bands of maximum solar irradiance, the bands where photosynthesis operates at peak efficiency, the bands where the fossil record shows the highest concentrations of ancient land organisms. This is a pattern, not a proof, but patterns at this scale, this consistent, this chemically specific, do not accumulate by coincidence. The official story does not merely fail to explain these anomalies, it is structured in a way that makes them unaskable. The category of geological formation forecloses the category of biological remnant before the inquiry can begin. Not because the scientists are dishonest, because the framework was built in a specific century by specific men under specific institutional pressures to produce a legible, extractable, morally unencumbered world, a world with no prior state to restore, no prior canopy to account for, no prior biological order whose end creates obligations. That is the hidden function. Not conspiracy. Architecture. The framework functions as permission. It renders the landscape neutral, ancient, geological, pre-human, and in doing so it renders extraction morally invisible. What was taken from stone. Stone has no prior owner. Stone holds no memory. Stone cannot testify. Return to Devil's Tower one final time. The tour guide description: a volcanic intrusion, hexagonal columns, talus at the base, columnar basalt, igneous cooling, the same words from the beginning of this story, before anything changed. The field of debris at the base of Devil's Tower is called talus in every official document. Collapsed rock, the product of freeze-thaw cycling and gravity over 50 million years. That is the word the surveys chose. Talus. In the logging industry, the field of broken material left at the base of a felled tree has a different name. It is called slash. The tops, the branches, the splintered wood, the debris that comes down when the main trunk comes down. Loggers know what slash looks like. It looks like a wide, irregular field of angular broken material surrounding a central vertical remnant. It looks exactly like the base of Devil's Tower. The question this story began with was simple. If the trees they cut down were 40 miles tall, where did all the wood go? The answer has been beneath your feet the entire time. You have been walking on it, building on it, fueling civilizations with it, carving roads through it, mapping it, surveying it, naming it, dating it. You have been calling it geology for 200 years. It is not geology. It is what remains.